Bronze weapons flash in the morning light. Oars are shattering the water. The sun is barely over the horizon at Salamis, but the narrow channel is already choked with warships. For Greek sailors rowing into this fight, the stakes are absolute. The Persian army occupies the mainland, and Athens has been burned to the ground. Their families have evacuated. The cities are fighting for pure survival. If the Greek fleet breaks in these waters, the resistance has nowhere left to hide. They will cease to exist. High above the battlefield, the Persian king Xerxes watches. He brought an international fleet spanning from Phoenician to Egyptian sailors, and he expected his overwhelming numbers to easily crush the cornered Greek navy. But as the Persian ships pour into the strait, the plan stalls. The Greeks aren't fleeing, they're turning to fight. The Greek commander, Themistocles, knew he couldn't beat the Persian Empire in a straightforward fight. Instead, he fed Xerxes bad information, making the king believe the Greeks were paralyzed by fear. Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into a trap by giving Xerxes exactly the scenario he wanted to believe. This map shows why the deception was deadly. The Persian fleet approached from the open sea, but had to push through this tight channel. As more ships poured in, their sheer numbers became a fatal liability, packing tightly together. Ancient naval warfare relied on speed. A wooden trireme functions as a weapon only when it has water to accelerate and drive its bronze ram into an enemy. Without that space, the Persian fleet paralyzed itself. At this scale, organization vanished. There were no radios. Officers shouted commands, but the words were lost in the deafening crack of timber, splashing oars, and thick smoke obscuring the water. Highly experienced sailors from the Egyptian and Phoenician contingents suddenly found themselves blind. Trying to maneuver away from Greek attacks, they ended up colliding with their own allies. The Persian sailors didn't lack skill, they lacked room. The battlefield's geometry stripped them of mobility, turning a massive fleet into a congested traffic jam. The Greeks exploited that paralysis. They accelerated their triremes into the crowded Persian lines and drove their rams straight into the immobilized hulls. The impact split wood and shattered oars. Men were violently thrown from the decks into a sea thick with floating debris. There were no lifeboats waiting. A sailor in the water was completely on his own. The disaster climbed the ranks. Aristobignes, a top Persian commander and Xerxes' brother, was killed. Without senior leadership, the fleet's ability to coordinate any kind of defensive formation dissolved. The men of the Persian fleet were fighting far from home on an imperial expedition. Greeks fought on their own coastline, knowing a loss meant the end of their families and freedom. That desperation translated into immense tactical focus. The Persian front line broke and attempted to withdraw, but the ships behind them, unaware, kept pushing forward into the strait. The fleet began crushing itself in the middle. By drawing the enemy into a confined space, the Greeks turned geography into a weapon, transforming a desperate defensive stand into a systematic slaughter. When the noise finally faded, the waters around Salamis were choked with broken timber and the wreckage of a broken fleet. For Xerxes, watching from the shoreline, the absolute certainty of an easy conquest was gone. His invasion force had suffered a catastrophic wound. The Persian navy was the invasion's logistical spine, protecting supply lines from Asia. With the fleet shattered, that artery severed. Winter was closing in. Without the sea to supply the enormous land force, the Persian army retreated northward. Xerxes decided to pull out of Greece and return to Asia. He left behind a smaller but highly dangerous land force under the command of his experienced general Mardonius. The Greek navy survived, and the sea was safe for now, but the war remained unfinished. Mardonius and his troops still posed a massive threat to the Greek mainland. To win their survival, the Greeks would have to face the Persian war machine one last time. Only this time they would meet on the open plains of Plataea, where there were no narrow channels, no hidden traps, and nowhere to hide. The year is 480 BC, and Athens is burning. The largest military force the ancient world had ever seen has breached the gates of Greece, and the remaining defenders are facing total annihilation. To see how a single strategy flipped these impossible odds, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. King Xerxes commanded an empire that spanned 3 continents. He sought at the center of a system that could bridge the Hellespont, move mountains, and assemble troops from dozens of nations. To the Greeks, his power seemed absolute. The Persian land army had already pushed the defenders south. The Athenians had been forced to abandon their homes to the flames, and their tiny fleet was now cornered near the island of Salamis. The Greeks found an opening. Survival didn't require defeating the entire Persian Empire. It only required forcing the king into one catastrophic mistake. The open Mediterranean allowed the massive Persian navy to easily flank and destroy the Greeks. But the Salamis coastline created narrow bottlenecks. In these channels, thousands of jammed ships would lose all maneuverability, turning the empire's greatest advantage into a source of chaos. The strategy was sound, but it relied on the king's cooperation. Xerxes was already winning. He had no logical reason to abandon his dominant position and sail his fleet into a death trap. To make the plan work, the Greeks had to make Xerxes believe that his victory was slipping away, forcing him to chase a ghost into the straits. Themistocles bet the fate of Greece on a high-stakes deception. He sent a secret messenger directly to the Persian king, appearing to commit an act of treason. The messenger claimed the Greeks were terrified, their alliance was collapsing, and the fleet was preparing to flee under the cover of darkness. The message exploited the king's desire for a quick end to the war. By framing the Greek retreat as a fleeting window of opportunity, it pressured Xerxes to act immediately or risk losing his chance to crush the rebellion once and for all. Driven by the momentum of his own success, Xerxes took the bait. He gave the order, and the massive Persian navy began rowing into the narrow waters of the strait. Themistocles had weaponized the king's own confidence, using Xerxes' expectations to position the imperial fleet exactly where the Greek rams could reach them. The Greek trireme was less of a boat and more of a manned missile. At the front of each ship was a heavy, curved bronze ram designed to punch through solid timber. The tactics were brutally simple. Oarsmen would row in unison to build maximum speed, aiming the ram directly at the side of an enemy hull. On impact, the enemy ship shattered. Seawater flooded the hull instantly, and the vessel would go down, creating an obstacle for the ships behind it. This ramming style required a crowded battlefield. In the open sea, a target could easily turn away, but inside the strait, the Persians had nowhere to go. At dawn, the Persians realized they had rowed into an ambush. The Greeks hadn't fled. They were formed up in a disciplined line, charging straight at the congested Persian front. The first wave of Greek rams tore into the Persian lines, sinking ships and creating an immediate pileup. As this schematic shows, the bottleneck created a cascading failure. Persian ships in the rear kept pushing forward, crashing into their own allies who were trying to retreat or maneuver away from the Greek attack. The battle devolved into a claustrophobic melee. Commands were lost in the noise, and the sheer size of the Persian fleet became its own executioner, as ships crushed one another in the narrow channel. Geography and psychology had finished what the Greek navy started. The greatest fleet on earth was defeated because it had run out of room to fight. As the fighting died down, the sea was littered with the wreckage of an empire's ambitions. From his throne on the shore, Xerxes watched his navy and his strategy disintegrate. The loss at sea broke the invasion's momentum. Without his fleet to protect his supply lines, Xerxes could no longer sustain his massive army in the field, forcing him to immediately withdraw the majority of his forces to Asia. A year later, the Greeks would meet the remaining Persian forces on the plains of Plataea for a final land battle. But it was the naval victory at Salamis that had already decided the fate of the war. Themistocles demonstrated that an overwhelming force can be dismantled if you can dictate the terms of the engagement. Themistocles turned geography and deception into a force multiplier. Salamis stands as proof that the ultimate weapon is the ability to force an opponent into the exact battle they are least prepared to fight.